community. I've told them a bit about you at the Perth Mint. What I'm curious about is, how did you end up in the Perth Mint? Did you always, perhaps in your youth, have an interest in precious metals, or what was your background that led you to a destination like a national mint?
Well, no, look, I had just come out of uni, had been working in a standard sort of job in the retail industry, and I saw this ad for administration officer in the Perth Mint in their branch in Sydney. And I had no idea about precious metals. It was just a job. So I took the job, and yeah, I think gold's one of those things that you sort of get stuck in, I think, and get intrigued by. It's a very interesting market, so I just got the bug, and I've been there in that market ever since.
How many years at the Mint?
I started there in 1994, so it's about 20 years.
Okay, so I see that you guys, probably more than the U.S. Mint, make coins that would make people smile, like your Star Trek collection, for example, commemorating Star Trek. I was wondering if they use those coins on Vulcan, where Dr. Spock is from. Mr. Spock is from. Do they use them? We have aliens in our community, Bron, so I was curious if they're also able to be beamed up from a transporter room. But I think that's a great idea. Do you find those being popular, and with what kind of people? Collectors rather than people that are looking for hedges? And are there premiums because they're kind of an interesting theme for precious metals?
Yeah, well, yeah, those coins are particularly targeted at collectors, and they have a limited sort of mintage or number of coins that we make, and they do trade at a premium, or they're sold at a premium, and they have a collectible value. So you certainly wouldn't buy them for investment purposes. We make bullion coins like the US Mint does for investment purposes. But the advantage of those coins is that they attract new people into precious metals. So you might have a Star Trek, someone who's into Star Trek or whatever the theme is. We did a coin on Back to the Future as well.
So it's a marketing angle.
It is a marketing angle. I mean, obviously they're a collectible coin, and it's a reasonable profit line. But I think what happens is that someone who's interested in Star Trek sort of goes, oh, I want to collect things about Star Trek. But then it gets them into they go, oh, precious metals, a coin. And I think we do sort of get, we sort of pick up new investors that way because it introduces them to precious metals.
Okay, before we get to the metals, cryptocurrency, which some people are saying could be a competitive product. It offers the same type of privacy. You can't touch it or feel it. What's your view on cryptocurrency versus precious metals? I'm far from an expert in crypto, but I noticed the animal spirits are coming back into Bitcoin, and that's why I brought it up today. Do you see any parallels with people that are interested in Bitcoin or also precious metal heads as well?
Yeah, there is a bit of crossover, and I think the Bitcoin design sort of was heavily replicated on the concept of gold being limited in quantity and having some of those privacy aspects with it. I think, though, that Bitcoin's probably got a bit of a challenge in that it doesn't really have an intrinsic value, and I think that causes it to have a very high volatility because you've got a very large speculative component rather than a base sort of intrinsic fundamental supply and demand factors, industrial use, and the sort of history of gold as a hoarded sort of form of money.
Yes.
And I think at this stage, Bitcoin
it's untested like the history of precious metals has been tested through civilizations and eons.
Yeah, and I think the problem for the cryptocurrencies is that with such a large speculative element, it's very hard for it to gain a monetary aspect because it's quite volatile. So it's a bit of a sort of chicken and egg situation. It needs to stabilise in price, but it's difficult to do that whilst you've still got a very large speculative component in price. So I think it's still got a way to go before it would become a stable form of money.
Plus, you can't put it in a coffee can and bury it in the backyard, and what happens if your internet fails?
Correct, yes. It's a purely digital digital sort of currency.
All right, so I want to talk about what the Mint possibly doesn't advise people, what to do with cash holdings. You know, you think about accumulating a percentage in physical metals. I believe everyone should own some physical metals. You know, what's the old saying in the gold industry? Even though there are many of us that think it could trade under 1,000 before the next wave, don't wait to buy gold and wait. What do you advise people to do for safety? You know, you can be robbed, right? Or someone could find your hoard in your house, and maybe you can't afford a floor safe. A lot of people talk about going with a reputable company for storage. Does the Perth Mint provide that for people that want to own gold but have fears of security of holding it in their houses or their homes?
Yeah, we do. Look, I mean, I think it's a thing that depends on each individual person. Like, you know, I worked in our depository business for many years, and one of the clients that struck me was this lady who lived in Israel, and she lived in an apartment. You know, yeah. So for her, you know, holding physical gold was not actually safe at all because, you know, she could have a Scud missile come over and blow up the apartment or something. So, you know, right. For her, having the gold offshore in Perth was actually safer. But then depending on other people's circumstances, you know, depending on your house and so forth, you may be able to hide gold quite well and do it in a safe manner. So it does depend on your personal circumstances.
Okay, maybe it's not just that it's easy to break into an apartment, or you're right, you know, Israel could be attacked. Maybe it's also about having diversification from your home country in case draconian measures take place, which there are precedents here in the U.S. Gold was confiscated in the 30s. People believe that if they have eagles, because they're legal tender coins, that they're going to let people keep their eagles and take their Krugerrands. I think if they come for the Krugs, they're coming for the eagles. So could that also be a valid reason for people to want to have offshore storage of their precious metals?
Yeah, it is actually, and out of the, I think, $2.5 billion worth of precious metals that we store in Perth, half of those are American. And we every year we sort of celebrate that confiscation date in April because, you know, probably half of our clients that we very much thank Roosevelt for doing that, because it has really a lot of Americans on wanting to store some metal offshore. But I think, again, notwithstanding the ease with which you can open accounts online and trade gold and hold it offshore, I still think it's a case of having a bit of a mix. You want some physical metal close to yourself, and then I think, you know, once you've got enough that you're comfortable with yourself physically, then only then you probably look at doing offshore. And you also got to look at it, I think, as well in terms of, you know, prepping as well. I mean, I think, you know, in the sort of extreme circumstances that you're talking about there, you also want to have other resources done. So, you know, if you're worried about that, it's a case of sort of going, okay, look, I'll pay off debt, then I'll sort of, you know, do a bit of prepping and have some food and other things backed up, and only then, I think, do you get into precious metals. You know, it's sort of like a staging. Yeah, I think you just got to. I'm sort of not really keen on people just going, well, I'm going to pile everything into precious metals, and, you know, that's it. It's a whole sort of, it's part of a whole package of preparation.
Yeah, you can't eat gold, can you? You could get indigestion from that. You know what? You may be celebrating U.S. banks along with what Roosevelt did, because there's more and more talk, Bron, that banks are frowning upon, discouraging, not allowing their customers to store precious metals in safety deposit boxes. Have you heard about that?
Yes, I have heard about that. It's a bit hard to know whether I think a lot of the banks are getting out of that sort of physical business. I think maybe safety deposit.
What's the difference? What's the difference? What you put in your own personal safety deposit box? Why would they be against storing that in a safety deposit box? I don't think it's being in the business. They have the boxes. People could put. They're even frowning upon people keeping cash in their safety deposit boxes. What do you think is going on? You know, we're here, okay? I'm here. I'm in San Diego. I'm in the U.S. How does someone with your perspective from a mint and from overseas in Australia see that, see what's developing in the U.S. when it comes to restricting freedom of monetary choices that people want to make?
Well, I don't think it's just monetary. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, America was a country that you looked up to as a place of sort of freedom, and you know, anyone could have a go and make something of themselves. And I think that has been. I mean, that's not the image it has now. Looking away from here, I mean, just the stuff that I read and little things like that. You know, it does make you ask questions, and I think there has been a pullback in the freedoms in America. And
yeah, we only have four FX brokers we could use here now. Since the financial crisis and since terrorism, many of our liberties, civil liberties, have been taken away. So take away our liberties and please protect us, Mr. Leader, is what it seems to be coming there. Are Americans also moving to Australia? Do you have more freedoms there after this financial crisis that we had in 2008 and threat of terrorism? Have those civil liberties remained intact in Australia?
Yeah, look, I think Australia is traditionally about 10 years behind America, both sort of political trends and economic trends. And so we haven't seen that much here. And I mean, like, we don't have those same restrictions on safety deposit boxes. I think the Australian attitude is a little bit more sort of anti-authoritarian, so some of that too heavy-handed sort of stuff wouldn't go down too well. But I don't think we're, as well, not so much of a target from a terrorist point of view, so I don't think there's been as much restrictions here. But there's still a bit of a tendency towards that. There has been some legislation just put in around requiring internet service providers to keep 2 years' worth of metadata on their clients' sort of surfing activities on the internet. So there's a little bit of creeping stuff along similar, you know, we need to know what the bad guys are doing type of legislation. But I wouldn't say it's as bad here. Yeah, we're still quite free at this stage.
Can the Americans that buy gold and store it over there do it in a street name, or is it reported to the IRS in the U.S.?
No, we don't have any reporting requirements into the U.S. We have, I mean, we have had, the way that we work is Perth Mint's actually it's owned by the state government of Western Australia, which in cultural terms is very similar to Texas in terms of the West Australians' attitude to the rest of the country. And the that Gold Corporation was created as an act of Parliament, and in that act, it's got a lot of stuff around what we can do, and also around our privacy requirements. So if I, for example, if I mention anything about a client's account to any other person, then I could face imprisonment and fines under the law. There's actually a law. So all the staff are really paranoid about, you know, client privacy, because it's not just some sort of, you know, corporate policy. It's actually that as a client, if you thought that I had revealed your information, you could go to the police and say, this law, Section 74 of the Act was being breached. Please prosecute. And so what happens is when we do get law enforcement inquiries from other countries, our standard response is to say, look, if you've got a valid claim to seek information on a client account, then place an order with the court, West Australian court, and the court will make a judgment and determination as to whether the request is valid. And so we did have a case. We did have a case where a client had got involved in some activities and illegal activities, or he'd gotten some bankruptcy or whatever it was. I can't remember the details. And the investigator in the US needed information about the client's account. So he had to go to court, and he filed a claim under the court, and a police officer came to us and checked the facts of the case, and then, you know, the court made a determination that we were authorised to hand over the account information. So it's quite an onerous process.
Okay, they're really going to have to be interested or put pressure on your courts like they did on the banks in Switzerland. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit. I went to your blog, excellent blog, Bron. I encourage people that have an interest in the gold market to follow it. I want to talk about what Jim Sinclair and people that are followers of Sinclair talk about, and that's the manipulation of gold, but in the paper markets. And I see you wrote about it. And the whole idea behind the Shanghai Exchange is that it was going to be cash and carry, and it was going to emancipate the gold price from the paper market. What are your thoughts and views on that?
Look, I think there's no doubt that you've got, and I think anyone who looks at a chart, particularly on intraday, can see that there are traders that are manipulating the price and trying to influence it one way or the other. And funnily enough, I mean, most of the manipulation talk is only when the price is down and not when we see huge spikes up. But so it works both ways.
Good point.
I think, though, that with this sort of paper and physical manipulation story, you know, in the end, if there's a huge divergence between paper markets, i.e. futures markets, and spot, arbitrages are going to step into that. You know, so if you look at any futures and spot movement, you'll see that they are tending to move together, purely because if the gap becomes too big, it just creates a profit for a bank or a hedge fund or a trader to be able to buy spot, sell futures, or buy futures and sell spot. And so I don't see that there's going to be a divergence until there's a complete breakdown in trust in futures markets and the fact of whether the futures contracts will be delivered. And that's
okay, so you don't subscribe to the theory that open interest of short positions would not even have enough gold to cover it if it came down to delivery, and that's what puts artificial pressure on the price to the downside?
Look, the shorts don't have the metal, but the longs don't have the money either in a lot of cases. You know, and I think what's hidden and what we don't know is to what extent are market makers, bullion banks, acting in arbitrage market making fashion where they offset their short positions with a long position in the spot market, or vice versa. They may be short in the spot and long in the futures market. So that's a natural market making activity versus our proprietary position that they may take. And I think bullion banks can take both at the same time. You know, they can be acting as a market maker, seeing demand either to short or long in the futures market, and then hedging that and offsetting it into the spot market, and indeed offsetting it into the forwards market over the counter, versus actual proprietary positions that they take.
Okay.
I think it open, because the market's very opaque. It does open up to a lot of speculation about what's occurring, and I think that sometimes in these sort of debates around what's driving what, people just completely ignore that the fact that bullion banks can hold long and short positions in the over-the-counter market. And the reason that's important is because I don't want to take too much on. I think you've got to be careful to take too much face value on commitment of trader reports and into the futures market, because keep in mind a bullion bank knows that everyone's looking at the commitment of traders and warehouse stocks, and so you've got to think that if you do believe in a manipulation thesis, that they could easily say, well, okay, let's go short futures and give people perception that we're short, but we're actually pretty much hedged because we go long and buy a heap of gold in the spot market. So I think you've got to be careful about that, because they could be playing people the other way as well.
Okay. I'd like to get your reaction on the Germans' request about a year or so ago for the U.S. to send back their gold, and that it's taken so long, and I'm not even sure that they've delivered all the gold that the Germans have requested. What do you think is behind that delay of the U.S. dragging its feet to deliver Germany's gold back?
Well, I think if you look at actual Germany statements by the Bundesbank, and I blogged on this, you'll find that they don't have a problem with the Federal Reserve. They make a lot of statements publicly about how they trust them and work with them and so on and so forth. So I don't see this as particularly anything that is driven by actual German political governmental issues. I think it's because of the success of the campaign within Germany about repatriation and where the gold is and what is being done with it, that has, in a sense, created a political issue that then forced the Bundesbank to respond. And because they...
What's behind that political issue, Bron? Why was there a repatriation movement in Germany?
Well, I think that's just a whole lot of gold people that are quite concerned in Germany about the location of the precious metals. So,
okay.
So the
government trusts the Fed, but the German people do not.
Yeah, so I think it's a grassroots campaign. I think it just put a lot of focus on the issue and really created enough of a political issue within Germany that the Bundesbank and the government had to respond. And so that's why they've responded, but they're not really rushing to it because they see this as something that they have to do to appease this sort of political issue domestically. But they're not therefore going to rush, and it's not that because they themselves, the government, have any issues with the location of the metal themselves or are particularly worried. So that's why they're dragging the thing out and taking their time, and they're working with the Fed ultimately to say what's the most easiest way for us to get this metal back. So I think it's not something that's driven within the government, it's driven within the government responding to political campaign from the public. So, I mean, that's why it's taking its time, because they don't really see, from a governmental point of view, any issue with it. And they're saying, well, why should we rush to get, hundreds of tons in a short period of time, which will cost us a lot of money? So let's just take our time. The Fed, they're good guys, we trust them. I mean, that's the attitude if you read between the lines of the various public statements that the Bundesbank and others have made.
Okay. Thanks for covering that. I read on your blog there was a piece about will China save us? And before we get to that you wrote about that, what do you think is behind China's appetite for mass accumulation of gold reserves over the last several years?
Oh, look, I certainly think that politically China wishes to rebalance the reserves and acquire a lot more gold. There's no doubt about that. I think, however, that if you look at what they've said officially, they've been very explicit in that they don't want to crimp the public's ability to own precious metals. And I think the government's view is that whether the government owns the precious metals or whether the public own the precious metals are one and the same thing for them. As long as the country itself has accumulated precious metals, that's what they're interested in. And I've done a lot of sort of analysis of the central bank's accumulation. And it appears to me that the central bank effectively they'll let the public buy as much gold as they need, and only will they step in to acquire the balance that they feel they can do without moving the price. So, and I think that so I think they've got certainly a very pro-gold policy, but I think it's not so much necessarily that they themselves have to have 10,000 ounces as central bank reserves. They're happy, I think, would be happy if they had 5,000 officially and 5,000 was held by the public, or 10,000 was held by the public. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I think the policy is. Not that they say that exactly.
Do you put any weight into articles and rumors that one of the reasons for this is that China is going to go to a gold-backed yuan?
I don't think so. I think that governments like the ability to manage their currency and have control over it, and like fiat for that reason. So I don't think that they would be looking to move to a gold standard. I think they're looking to beef up the gold to give their currency credibility and to match the large gold holders in the Western world, so that it's sort of on the same level playing field in terms of the gold that they have in the country. And I think that they also hold it as that last resort asset. And in that sense, you've got to look towards Korea and a couple of other countries that had problems in FX issues. They called upon the public to voluntarily supply gold, supply it to the government, which they did. And I think China would see that their public and private gold reserves is similar in that sense. And I'm quite sure that if China felt, for whatever reason, let's say we're in a world war and they needed hard currency like precious metals, I think the public would hand the gold over to the government in a patriotic sort of sense. So I think that's where they're coming from. They just see gold, both officially and private, as effectively giving the country in a whole that extra sort of stability and last resort asset.
Do you think that if the IMF, which was supposed to do their reserve currency review, they do it every 10 years. It was supposed to be in October. There was talk that the yuan might be included in the SDR. If that does happen, what effect do you think that's going to have on, say, the U.S. dollar and precious metal prices?
I don't think it'll have too much impact. I think it's been telegraphed well in advance. And I think China's gold accumulation rate of accumulation will continue. Professional markets are aware of China's accumulation and probably has a general idea about how much has been accumulated. I don't think that's going to change radically too much if China gets into the SDR. I think, again, it's just part of China wanting to gain, slowly move itself into the mainstream global sort of financial markets and its status in the world. And it's a transition and a general thing, because to really become a global currency, they've really got to open up the currency, right. And they still obviously want to be pretty careful about that. And so I think it's just a part of a step-by-step process to opening up their market.
I'd like to talk about poor man's gold, which is silver, and the gold-silver ratio. Historically, there are times when it's better to own silver over gold. A lot of people talking about where the ratio's at right now, that silver is cheap in comparison of gold, thinking that silver might even outperform gold on the next wave up in precious metal prices. What are your thoughts with it being more of an economically sensitive precious metal than gold? What's your view on diversification, not just gold, but owning silver, and that silver could outperform gold?
Yeah, look, I think there is a case for having gold in, if you're looking at precious metals, mixing gold with a bit of silver. Silver is about a 50% industrial metal, but it still has that high monetary component, as we see with the huge interest in American Eagle silver coins. It just shows you that it still has a very significant monetary investment demand component to it. But you've got to look at that industrial component, and I think that's why silver's been a bit weak relative to gold recently, because of probably a fall off in the industrial component. And so I think until the economy's probably still going to be pretty weak. I can't really see that turning around. I think that'll put a bit of a dampener on silver. But yeah, I think it does react and has a lot more volatility than gold. So I think if gold does a real move, then silver will look to do a little bit of a catch-up with it. So I think you can see a bit of outperformance. But in the sort of next couple of months or so, it's probably still going to be a bit weak relative to gold, and I think that ratio will stay in the high 70s.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and look, gold itself, my view on silver and gold itself is in a bit of a sideways at the moment, even though it seems to have bottomed. It's dropped under the 200 moving day average. So I know the tendency of commentators is to want to make a call. Gold's going to go up, gold's going to go down. The call that a lot of analysts don't want to make is it's going to do nothing, it's going to be boring and go sideways. And I have a feeling that, gold has been in a downtrend, and yes, it's had a nice move up since July and shown a bit of strength. But it's coming off a bit now, and I think this is just about, we've had a big bear market, and I think gold and silver are going to take a while to base and really form some confidence before it can really make a huge run up.
I agree with your philosophy. Better to be boring than to mislead and hype. So congratulations on that, Bron. Let me ask you one more question. I know I said the last one was my last, but I promise you. Are you, as someone who watches all the machinations of central banks and all the QE that has happened, that continues to happen, surprised by the lack of response in the precious metal group?
Yeah, it is funny. I think that gold traditionally was expected to respond to this, but I think look, I have a theory. My theory on, and what I've seen through this whole bull market in gold from 2000 up, in terms of our client behaviour, is very much a sort of stepping fashion. So it sort of moves from a level to another level, then to another level. And so what I saw is that when an event occurred, some sort of economic event, what we would see would be a surge in the client account openings, and then they would buy precious metals, and then it would flatten out. And then there'd be another event, and you'd see another surge in client account openings. And I've seen this pattern a few times, and what I think it is that there's a wide range in the public between, people at this end who you would consider to be very skeptical people, and then there's people on this end who are extremely trusting. And so everyone's got a different level at which they start to question the system, question the economic, question central banking, question government control over the economy. And so what's happened through this bull market is, as we've had more and more, and the GFC triggered a lot of this, but even after the GFC, triggered a lot of clients at different points in time. They reached their breaking point to say, you know what, I don't think the government knows what they're doing, or that they've got it under control, and that's why they then go and buy precious metals. And what I've seen with this fall in the gold from 1900 now is that we haven't seen, at least in the Perth Mint, liquidations of clients. It's not like a lot of clients have come and said, that's it, I'm out, and they've all been selling. What we've seen is we've had a natural sort of attrition rate in clients, but there hasn't been any surge in selling. What we've seen is a drop-off in buying. It's the inflows that have dried up. And so I think that the general public, the people that are still yet to buy precious metals in serious quantity, have a very trusting view of the economy and the government. And I think they saw the GFC, and some stuff was done. They don't understand what it is, QE, whatever. The mainstream media is saying the economy is turning around. They're believing that. And I think they just have a very higher tolerance before they will be able to question and say, wait a minute, I actually think these guys are talking a lot of crap. They don't know what they're doing. And then they start to look for alternatives and end up in precious metals. But the existing...
I think that event will be a 30% sell-off in equities. Because that's where their confidence is.
Yeah, they've seen a sell-off already in 2008, and they're like, okay, the economy's recovering or the stock market's recovering, because these are the sort of simplistic things that people look at. You know, the stock market's going up, okay, everything must be okay. Mm-hmm. So I think that you do need a trigger, and again, if you have another equity sell down, then that will trigger another bunch of people to go, well, there was a hit in 2008, now I've had another hit, this is still unstable, they haven't fixed the problems, and again, they question, and then they'll start to move into precious metals. But the key thing is that the people that have bought in already, they aren't selling, they're sitting tight. But they're
not traders, they're holding it for the right reasons, aren't they, Bron? They're trading it. It's an insurance policy that they hope they never have to collect on.
Yeah, and the 2013 drop, that sucked a lot of new existing holders to top up. So I think we've sort of run out. Existing people that are holding precious metals have run out. They've bought as much as they want to buy. They're set. They're sitting tight. They're not selling. So that's why the price has been weak, because everyone who's already bought in and is wanting insurance have made that action. They've bought the gold up into 2011. They topped up on some of the big drops. They're sitting there tight. And what we're waiting for really before gold can make the move up is for this next bunch of people to question and go, wait a minute, what's going on? The government doesn't have things under control. I'm not happy with another equities drop. Interest rates are too low, and that triggers them into looking for alternatives.
Bron, what a great interview. I'm so glad that I reached out to you on Twitter. It's the best discussion I've ever had on precious metals with anyone. Perth Mint is fortunate to have a guy like you, and I want to thank you for sharing your time and edifying us about an important ingredient going forward into the world financial system that everyone should consider. And the best way to follow you is at your Twitter handle, at Bron Suchecki, and anywhere else people could follow you. Go to the Perth Mint website.
Just go to perthmint.com and you'll click on Research tab. There's a Research tab, and I'll write under that.
Okay, and if I order a Star Trek coin, you'll send me an 8x10 autographed picture of you?
I can do. You really want it.
Thank you so much, Bron. It's not only, see, we not only inform, but we also have to have fun, don't we? So thanks so much. Yeah, thanks for hanging out with us today, Bron. Good hunting, my friend. Bye-bye.